The city's skyline gleamed with ambition, every glass tower a monument to power and wealth. At the heart of it all stood Hallberg Industries, a name that once commanded respect but now whispered secrets in the corridors of power. To the outside world, Hallberg was the pinnacle of corporate achievement, but to those trapped inside its walls, it was a machine that chewed up integrity and spit out anyone who stood in its way. Among them was Elena Torres, a woman whose sharp mind and relentless work ethic had earned her a place near the top, but whose conscience made her a target the moment she refused to play their game. Her rise through the ranks had been steady, the kind of story that human resources loved to spotlight in glossy brochures. A woman from modest beginnings who had clawed her way into the executive circle with brains, discipline, and grit. But behind the polished image, Elena saw the cracks. She noticed contracts pushed through with invisible hands, numbers on financial statements that didn't align, and whispered meetings behind closed doors where decisions were made that never appeared in official records. At first, she tried to rationalize it, telling herself that all corporations had shadows, that maybe she was too idealistic, too unwilling to accept the compromises required at the top. But the day she uncovered a chain of internal memos detailing bribes paid to regulators, her illusion shattered. She could have looked away, could have buried the files in the same drawer where others bury their consciences. Instead, she printed them, locked them in her briefcase, and carried the weight home with her. Every night, she spread the papers across her kitchen table, tracing the connections like a detective piecing together a crime scene. The deeper she went, the more grotesque it became: shell companies funneling money offshore, environmental violations disguised as accidental spills, employees silenced with payouts and threats. The corruption wasn't isolated. It was systemic, built into the bones of Hallberg itself. At first, she confided in colleagues she thought she could trust, speaking in careful tones, testing the waters. But loyalty in Hallberg had a price, and it became clear that many had already been bought. One by one, doors closed in her face, and she began to feel the shift in the air at work, the subtle looks, the sudden reassignment of projects, the invitations she no longer received. The company had noticed her hesitation, and predators were circling. They started small. Her emails mysteriously disappeared from servers, her expense reports flagged for errors. Then came the performance reviews filled with vague criticisms, hinting that perhaps she wasn't a team player. When she refused to bend, the pressure grew sharper, more personal. Rumors circulated that she was unstable, whispers about her personal life spun into corporate gossip. One evening, as she walked to her car, she found her tires slashed, the message clear: "Stop digging." But Elena had never been the type to retreat. Every act of intimidation only hardened her resolve. She began documenting everything, recording calls, saving copies of files to encrypted drives, keeping a trail that no one could erase. She reached out to journalists, regulators, even whistleblower organizations, though trust was difficult. Every conversation was a risk. Every meeting could be a trap. Still, she persisted, navigating a minefield of alliances and betrayals. Her war against Hallberg was not fought in a single dramatic clash, but in relentless, exhausting battles. Courtrooms where lawyers tried to twist her words. Boardrooms where executives smirked at her defiance. Nights spent alone in her apartment, blinds drawn, wondering if the footsteps in the hallway belonged to neighbors or to watchers sent to remind her she was vulnerable. She learned to live with fear, to carry it like armor, transforming it into determination. Months turned into years. Stories began leaking into the press, small at first, buried in the business pages, but soon splashed across front pages as more evidence surfaced. Elena's name became both a beacon and a curse, a hero to those who still believed in accountability, a traitor to those who thrived on Hallberg's corruption. She lost friends, opportunities, even the steady career she had once worked so hard to build. But she never lost herself. The climax came not in a dramatic takedown but in the steady crumble of Hallberg's empire. Investigations bled the company dry, executives were indicted, and shareholders abandoned the sinking ship. Elena watched it all unfold from the sidelines, not with triumph, but with a weary kind of relief. She knew the system was bigger than one company, that corruption would find new homes, new faces. But for a brief moment, she had torn away the mask and forced the world to look at what lurked beneath. In the aftermath, she walked through the city, the glass towers gleaming as they always had, indifferent to the battles fought in their shadows. She was no longer an executive, no longer a rising star, but something else entirely, someone who had stared into the heart of a predator and refused to be consumed. And though she carried scars that no one could see, she carried something else too, the knowledge that even in a world built on power and deception, one person's refusal to bow could make the strongest walls tremble. The story did not end with the collapse of Hallberg. For Elena, it was only the beginning of a life reshaped by fire. Victory was not clean, nor was it celebrated the way movies make you believe it should be. It was messy, jagged, and lined with consequences that no one prepared her for. Even as Hallberg crumbled, the predators who had thrived inside it scattered like cockroaches into the shadows, slipping into new companies, new ventures, reinventing themselves as though nothing had happened. The indictments captured headlines, but Elena knew how the system worked. Money could buy silence, delay trials, or shift blame downward to those least protected. Justice moved slowly, and often incompletely. For Elena, the price of her defiance was exile from the career she had once imagined. She became untouchable in the corporate world. Her name was whispered with caution, always accompanied by the word whistleblower, spoken like both an accusation and a warning. Recruiters stopped calling. Old colleagues vanished, unwilling to risk being tainted by association. When she passed familiar faces on the street, they looked through her as though she no longer existed. Isolation pressed on her, but she had learned to live with solitude. At night, when memories of the threats and betrayals crept into her mind, she reminded herself of the faces she never met but had fought for, the factory workers whose health had been jeopardized by toxic waste, the small-town families whose water had been poisoned by Hallberg's negligence, the communities left bankrupt when executives drained their lifeblood. They would never know her name, but their survival had been worth her sacrifice. Still, she was restless. Silence was not in her nature. One evening, she attended a quiet gathering of activists and journalists who had followed her story. They asked her to speak, and though her voice trembled at first, she found herself recounting everything, not just the corruption, but the fear, the loneliness, the terrible cost of refusing to be silent. The room listened in stillness, and for the first time, Elena realized she was no longer fighting alone. Word spread. Invitations followed. Conferences, interviews, panels on corporate ethics and accountability. She resisted at first, reluctant to step into the spotlight, but soon she understood. Her story was not just hers. It belonged to everyone trapped in systems built on silence and greed. Each time she stood at a podium, she saw faces in the crowd light up with recognition, as if her voice was giving form to their own unspoken battles. Her transformation was slow, but deliberate. She was no longer Elena Torres, the corporate executive. She became Elena Torres, the advocate, the survivor, the voice that corporations couldn't silence. Her battle scarred her, yes, but it also sharpened her into something unbreakable. Yet, in quiet moments, when the applause faded and she returned home to her small apartment, Elena still carried the shadows of Hallberg. The memory of watching her own company turn on her like a predator lingered, and sometimes she wondered if the fight had really ended, or if another beast was always waiting in the dark. She learned to live with that uncertainty, because she knew that corruption did not die with one company. It merely changed its face. And so, she remained vigilant. She was no longer naive enough to think she could save the world, but she carried within her the unshakable belief that one voice, one stubborn, relentless refusal to surrender, could disrupt even the most powerful of predators. In the glittering towers of the city, new corporations rose, promising innovation, progress, prosperity. But somewhere among them, Elena walked with eyes wide open, a survivor who had turned her scars into weapons. The predators were still out there, and she was ready for them.